The COO did not notice the job change all at once, and that's usually how it happens. At first, it was just one pricing exception, then a stuck priority that needed a nudge, then a Slack thread where everyone was talking but nobody was closing, then a founder comment that needed to be translated into something the team could actually use, then another meeting after the meeting, then another escalation that technically belonged somewhere else but somehow landed on the COO's desk. Nothing looked broken, and that is part of the problem. The business kept moving, the team stayed busy, the founder felt supported, the COO handled it. And because the COO handled it, the system never had to get better. Over time, the role changed. Not on paper, not in the org chart, not in the job description, but in practice. The COO slowly became the person who made unclear decisions usable, the person who turned hesitation into direction, the person who converted half-closed conversations into action, the person who kept moving when the decision system did not. That is the clarity job, and a lot of operators inherit it quietly. Welcome to the Hidden Drag Brief. My name is Wojnowski. Today I want to talk about the COO who slowly inherited the clarity job. And if you are a COO, a chief of staff, president, GM, or senior operator inside a founder-led company, there is a good chance you will recognize some version of this. You may not call it the clarity job. You may instead call it keeping things moving. You may call it helping the team understand the founder. You may call it smoothing things out. You may call it making sure nothing gets dropped. You may call it being useful. And in fairness, it is useful. There is real skill in it. But the question I want to sit with today is this. Is that skill strengthening the system, or is it compensating for a system that never learned how to close decisions? And that question matters because hidden drag often becomes visible first through the operator. Not through a dashboard, not through a formal process review, not through a quarterly planning session, through the person who keeps feeling the unfinished decision before anyone else names it. The COO feels it when the meeting ends and the room thinks the decision is made, but the team still does not know what to do on Monday. The chief of staff feels it when the founder says something casual in a leadership meeting and 3 people interpret it in 3 different ways. The president feels it when a priority keeps moving across agendas but no one can say what decision would actually close it. The GM feels it when a team brings options instead of recommendations because they have learned that recommendations get reopened. The operator feels the drag because the operator has to live in the gap between the conversation and the work. That gap is where the clarity job lives. Let me make this practical. Imagine a leadership meeting where the team is discussing a customer onboarding issue. The issue had been around for a while. Sales says the handoff is not clean. Customer success says expectations are being set too loosely. Product says the issue is really about implementation scope. Finance is worried about margin leakage. The founder listens, asks some sharp questions, and says something like, "We need to tighten this up, but I don't want us creating friction for new customers." Everyone nods. It sounds right. Nobody disagrees. And the meeting moves on. From the outside, it looks like progress. But what actually closed? Who owns the decision? What trade-off did the team accept? Did they decide to protect conversion speed or implementation discipline? Did they decide who has authority to say no to custom requests? Did they decide what sales can promise and what customer success can push back on? Maybe none of that was closed. But the meeting ended. So now the decision has to go somewhere. And often it goes to the COO. Not because someone says, "You now own the clarity gap." Nobody says that. It happens more quietly. After the meeting, sales asks, "So are we changing the handoff?" Customer success asks, "Can we push back on scope now?" Product asks, "Are we expected to support this?" The founder is already in the next conversation. The COO starts translating. Well, I think what we're saying is, let's treat this as the rule for now. I'll talk to the founder and make sure we're aligned. Let's not reopen the whole thing, but here's how we'll handle it this week. That is clarity work. Some of it is normal. Every operating role carries some translation. Every good COO helps convert strategy into execution. Every strong chief of staff helps make leadership intent usable. That is not the problem. The problem begins when translation becomes the operating system. When the team cannot move unless the operator interprets the founder. when decisions do not land unless the COO turns them into usable language afterward, when every fuzzy boundary waits for the same person to clarify it, when the organization starts relying on one person's judgment to compensate for missing decision closure. That is hidden drag. And it looks like maturity from the outside. That is why it is tricky. People will say, we're lucky to have such a strong COO. And they may be right. You may be lucky. But the sentence is worth inspecting. Because sometimes we're lucky to have a strong COO really means we have someone who can hold complexity, someone who can read the room, someone who can turn ambiguity into direction, someone who can keep the founder from becoming the bottleneck every time. And that is good. But sometimes it also means the system is weak, but the COO is strong enough to hide it. The founder has not fully transferred authority, but the COO is diplomatic enough to work around it. The team does not know where decisions live, but the COO keeps answering the question. The operating cadence does not create closure, but the COO follows up until something moves. That is different. One is leadership, the other is dependency. And dependency often feels like trust at first. People trust the COO. People know they can go to them. People know the COO will understand the context. People know the COO will not overreact. People know the COO can get the founders a real view. Again, that is a real value. But if every unclear decision routes through the same person, the organization is learning something. It's learning that clarity lives in the operator, not in the system. It is learning that escalation is safer than ownership. It is learning that decisions are not closed until the COO translates them. It is learning that the formal meeting is not the real closure point. The real closure point is the operator after the meeting. That is the meeting after the meeting. That is the hallway conversation. That is the Slack clarification. That is the quiet founder check-in. That is the let me just make sure I understand what we meant conversation. And over time, the operator becomes the place where unfinished decisions go to be made usable. Now, if you are that operator, this can be very hard to name because you may be very good at it. You may even enjoy part of it. There is a satisfaction in being useful. There is satisfaction in seeing the pattern before the room does. There is satisfaction in helping people move when they are stuck. There is satisfaction in being trusted by the founder and the team. And I do not want to dismiss that. This is not about pretending the work is beneath you, because it is not. This is often high-skill work, but there is a quiet cost when the same pattern repeats. The cost is not just time, it is the way the role starts to bend around ambiguity. The work you came to do gets displaced by the work the system keeps creating. Instead of building operating leverage, you are providing operating relief. Instead of strengthening decision paths, you are walking the decision across the gap yourself. Instead of helping the organization mature, you are helping it avoid the discomfort of maturing. That is a heavy sentence, but I think it's true. A lot of founder-led companies do not avoid maturity because they lack talent. They avoid it because the workaround is working just well enough. The COO is the workaround. The chief of staff is the workaround. The operator who can read everyone and translate everything is the workaround. And because the workaround works, the underlying decision system does not get examined. Nothing breaks loudly enough. The pricing exception gets handled. The client issue gets smoothed out. The stuck priority gets nudged forward. The founder's uncertainty gets converted into a direction. The team gets unstuck for now. For now is doing a lot of work there, because each rescue solves the immediate issue, but it may also reinforce the pattern that created the issue. If the COO keeps resolving pricing exceptions, the system may never define the pricing authority boundary. If the COO keeps translating founder hesitation, the founder may never have to clarify when input is input and when it is approval. If the COO keeps nudging the stuck priority forward, the leadership team may never have to name the trade-off that would actually close it. If the COO keeps absorbing escalations, the organization may never learn what should escalate and what should be carried closer to the work. That is why hidden drag can be so expensive. It is not always dramatic. It does not always look like conflict. Sometimes it looks like a very capable person making the system feel better than it is. And that can go on for a very long time, until the operator gets tired. or the founder gets frustrated that things still route back too often, or the team stops using judgment because they know the real decision will happen elsewhere, or growth adds enough complexity that the workaround cannot hold anymore. And that is usually when people start looking for a process fix. And so they add a meeting, they add a dashboard, they add a decision framework, they add a RACI, they add an approval matrix. Some of that might help, but only if the real issue is named. If the real issue is that the decisions do not close until the COO interprets them, the fix is not more process. The fix is decision closure. Who owns the call? What trade-off is being accepted? Where does founder input stop and approval begin? What authority moves to the operator, the leader, or the team? What would justify reopening the decision? Where is the decision recorded so the next person does not have to ask the COO again? Those questions are simple. They are also uncomfortable because they move clarity out of the person and into the system. And that is the shift. A mature decision system does not mean the COO stops being valuable. It means the COO's value moves upstream. Instead of answering every unclear decision, they build the conditions for more decisions to close closer to the work. Instead of translating every founder signal, they help define how founder judgment enters the system. Instead of absorbing every escalation, they help create escalation rules. Instead of keeping every priority alive, they help the team name which decision needs to close and who owns it. And that is a very different use of the operator. And it is very much more scalable. If you're a founder listening to this matters for you too. Because sometimes founders look at the COO and they see support. But the COO may be carrying more than support. They may be carrying your unfinished decisions. They may be carrying the authority you intended to delegate but never fully transferred. They may be carrying the discomfort of trade-offs you have not named plainly enough for the team. They may be carrying the emotional interpretation of your hesitation. You say, "I'm not sure," they turn it into 3 possible directions. You say, "Let's be careful," they turn it into a temporary operating rule. You ask one question in a meeting, they spend the next 2 days helping the team understand whether that question was curiosity, concern, or a veto. That is a lot of weight. And often founders do not realize how much of their judgment is being converted manually by the operator. Again, this is not about blame. Founder-led companies often grow through proximity. People learn the founder's taste. They learn the founder's standards. They learn what gets a yes and what gets challenged, what gets reopened. That is natural early on. But as the company grows, proximity has to become explicit enough to scale. Taste has to become principles. Instinct has to become decision criteria. Approval has to become authority. Founder judgment has to become usable without the founder being in every room. If the transfer does not happen, the COO often becomes the interpreter. And that is when the clarity job gets inherited. If you are the COO or operator, the move is not to stop helping. That would be very unrealistic. It might also be irresponsible. Some calls need you. Some issues should reach your desk. Some ambiguity is part of leadership. The move is to start noticing patterns before you absorb them automatically. Before you step in, ask, why did this reach me? Who could have made this call closer to the work? What decision was never clearly owned? What trade-off was avoided? What founder signal needs to be clarified? What authority line is missing? What would prevent the same issue from landing here again next month? Those questions change the work. They do not make you less helpful. They make your help more structural. Instead of only resolving the issue, you are starting to locate the drag. And that is the work that matters if the organization is going to mature. Let me give you a small example. A sales leader comes to the COO with a pricing exception. The easy move is to answer it. And sometimes you should. The customer is waiting. The deal matters. The business needs the call. Fine. But before you move on, ask what would have prevented it from reaching you. Was there no pricing threshold? Was there a threshold but the sales leader did not trust it? Was the founder known to reopen discounts later? Was finance consulted but not given authority? Was the exception really about pricing, or was it about strategic account status? That is the diagnostic move. You solve the immediate issue, but you do not let the system off the hook. You name the boundary that was missing. The same thing is true with founder hesitation. If the founder's comment creates confusion, the easy move is to translate it. Again, sometimes you should, but then ask, what made this comment ambiguous? Did the founder intend to approve, advise, challenge, or simply think out loud? Does the team know the difference? Does the founder know how their language is being heard? Is the operator now converting founder instinct into operational direction every week? If so, the issue is not a communication style problem. It is a decision system problem. The system needs a clearer way to separate founder input from founder approval. That is where capacity comes back. Not by making the founder less involved, by making the founder involvement clearer. That distinction matters a lot. The same pattern shows up with stuck priorities. A priority keeps carrying forward. The COO keeps pushing. They ask for updates. They clarify next steps. They remove blockers. They keep the thing alive. But every time it comes back, the real decision is still fuzzy. Are we prioritizing speed or quality? Are we accepting margin pressure or customer friction? Are we resourcing this now or admitting it is not actually a priority? Are we asking one team to carry a trade-off another team is not accepted? Until that decision closes, the COO is not managing execution. They are managing non-closure. And managing non-closure is exhausting because it never feels finished. You can make progress and still feel like nothing landed. You can send the recap and still know people interpreted it differently. You can get the team moving and still know you are carrying more of the decision than the system is. That is the emotional texture of the clarity job. It is not always dramatic. It is not always burnout in the obvious sense. Sometimes it's just that quiet feeling at the end of the day. Why does everything still need me to make it make sense? That is the signal. And if you hear yourself asking that, I would not ignore it. Because the goal is not to become less useful. The goal is to stop being useful in ways that keep the system immature. That's a hard line to walk. I know that. Strong operators are often strong because they can hold ambiguity. They can see around corners. They can read the founder. They can read the team. They can keep the business moving in imperfect conditions. And those are strengths. But any strength can become a trap if the system starts depending on it instead of learning from it. So the next time an unclear decision lands on your desk, try this. Handle what needs to be handled. Do not turn every issue into a workshop. Do not make the team wait while you redesign the operating model. Just notice the pattern. Then ask one follow-up question. What would need to be clearer for this not to reach me next time? And that's a simple question. It's also a powerful one because it shifts the conversation from relief to learning. It tells the system, I can help, but we are also going to learn from the fact that this had to come here. Over time, that is how the clarity job moves out of one person's head and into the operating rhythm. Decision owner, trade-off, authority plan, closure artifact, reopening rule. Those are not fancy concepts. They are the basics that keep decisions from drifting until the COO has to catch them. And if those basics are missing around one important priority, the diagnostic question is not why is the COO so busy? Rather, it is what decisions are landing on the COO because they never actually closed anywhere else. That is where I would start. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, start with one priority. Not all of them, just one. Pick the one that keeps resurfacing, the one that creates the most translation, the one where people keep coming to you for interpretation, permission, or direction. And then ask, what decision is this priority still trying to close? Who owns it? What trade-off has not been named? What authority has not really moved? What would stop this from landing on the same desk again? Those are all examples of exactly the kind of pattern the hidden drag diagnostic is built to surface. It takes about 7 to 10 minutes, and it will not solve the whole business. That is not the point. It will help identify whether the issue around one important priority is decision drag, alignment drag, structural drag, human drag, or a mixed pattern, and sometimes that's enough to make the real issue easier to name. The link is in the show notes. And if you're interested in exploring working with me more closely, the place to start is the same. Start with the hidden drag diagnostic, and from there we'll learn whether or not there's a further conversation to be had. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and share it with somebody else who may be struggling with decisions that do not close within their team. Wow, that's a lot for us to have handled, so thanks for listening to the Hidden Drag Brief. My name is Warren Wojnowski, and I will see you next time.